Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Wednesday, November 21st, 2018, the day before Thanksgiving. And here on the West Coast, we are extremely grateful that the rains have finally arrived. And they're clearing our air, hopefully snuffing out these wildfires that have caused devastation and heartbreak. And so we don't mind a soggy Thanksgiving this year. And I've learned that the smoke from the wildfires after the winds shifted yesterday have reached as far as New York and Washington, D.C. Hazy skies reported in several places on the East Coast, from smoke wafting from 3,000 miles west. Sorry about that, but we spent 13 days in Beijing-like conditions. And as you can imagine, we are deeply relieved that that appears to be behind us. Trump is trying to clear the decks and leave a firm impression with Americans and with the fine folks in the House of Saud. And there's a lot of reaction to his statement yesterday that was bizarre and inaccurate in so many respects. It began with America first, exclamation point, and the statement, the world is a very dangerous place, exclamation point. And the reaction involves ridicule, a lot of moral criticism, shame, judgment, and often a very selective look at the historic relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. First, let's recap some of the outrage, which is well-deserved. In the New York Times, they assigned Julian Barnes, among others, to analyze the president's statement yesterday. And here's a quote from it. "The country of Iran is responsible for a bloody proxy war against Saudi Arabia in Yemen." Hold on. It's the United States who began using Yemen as a shooting gallery during the Obama administration, and then the Saudis decided they would just bomb the hell out of the country. Iran, if at all, it has a bit role in Yemen. Yes, they support the Houthi rebels. And yes, it appears that a few Iranian missiles have been delivered there and used against the Saudi invaders. But it's more of a defensive move by Iran, and the efforts to paint it as a full-throated participant in the war in Yemen are flatly false. Then, when we talk about who is exporting terrorism, and Trump blames Iran repeatedly for that, we know that it's the extreme Wahhabi Muslims in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia who have been funding terrorist operations throughout the Middle East and beyond. And in particular in Syria, it was the proxies of Saudi and the Emirates who joined that, pardon the expression, clusterfuck, as the Sunni Shiite struggle was played out there. So Trump says the Iranians have killed many Americans and other innocent people throughout the Middle East. Can we have a list, please? And he says, without any evidence, Iran is considered the world's leading sponsor of terror. And of course, he loves to cite that at the protests and other expressions against the United States, Iranians often use the phrase death to America and death to Israel. And I think those are idioms. Surely, they don't mean nice things when they say that. But a lot of these expressions, as they're translated, I think are given weight that they don't really deserve. And then, of course, Trump plays the money card. He says, wow, I got the kingdom to agree to spend and invest $450 billion in the United States, $110 on military supplies that'll benefit the military-industrial contractor complex. And the rest, he says, will be spent on infrastructure. But we haven't seen any of that money so far. And then, of course, he plays the competitive card. If we foolishly cancel these contracts, Russia and China would be the enormous beneficiaries. It would be a wonderful gift to them directly from the United States. But accurately, Julian Barnes corrects that record. Baloney. The Saudis can't hang a Russian or Chinese bomb on an American-built F-15 or Apache gunships. They don't fit. They won't work. Saudi Arabia has heavily invested in American-made and NATO-standard weapons. Where do you get munitions and spare parts for those planes and helicopters? Well, from the United States. So here comes the rationalization from Trump. The crime against Khashoggi was a terrible one, and one that our country does not condone. Indeed, we have taken strong action against those already known to have participated in the murder. After great independent research, we know many details of this horrible crime. But, of course, he wants to pretend that he doesn't believe that it was Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman who approved or in some way authorized this botched operation. And, of course, Trump goes on to try to claim that, Khashoggi's just one guy who's been killed by these people and it's none of our business. And really, they've been a great ally, he said, in our very important fight against Iran. And, of course, Israel, which dictates American policy in the region, has demanded that we support the Saudis and line up against Iran. And let's see, here's a quote from Trump. It is our paramount goal to fully eliminate the threat of terrorism throughout the world. And if he really meant that, he would shut down the U.S.-Saudi connection. But, as you know, he doesn't mean that. And this morning I listened to Rush Limbaugh for a few minutes. He was feverishly defending Trump. And it wasn't particularly lucid. At one point, he talked about how, sure, the Saudis suck. But it's a sucky world, he said. And there are times when we just have to accept that they suck because there are other things that are more important. And he said their value is that the Saudis hate Iran as much as we do. And so, therefore, it's okay. And he then went on to paint Trump as the alpha male who is willing to stand up for these important American values, amoral as they appear. And it's just so damn convoluted. Now, the other piece, labeled News Analysis in the New York Times today, really turns up the outrage on Trump. He made clear, says Mark Mazzetti and Ben Hubbard, that he sees alliances as transactional, based on which foreign partners buy the most weapons. American jobs outweigh American values, and all countries act abhorrently, so an American president should never hold friends to different standards than enemies. That sucky concept. The article continues. It was also a revealing meditation on the role that Trump believes facts should play in political decision-making. The CIA concluded that MBS had ordered Khashoggi's killing. That's what American officials said last week. But yesterday, the president dismissed not only that assessment, but also the very process of seeking the truth, saying, why bother? It doesn't really matter anyway. And what matters is what's best for the economy and U.S. foreign policy, as I point out, dictated by Israel. The article goes on to point out that this is a blow to Turkey. And I believe that Trump will dispatch Fethullah Gulen from his, whatever it is, self-imposed exile in Pennsylvania to Turkey to face trial there for the alleged coup in 2016. And Trump hopes that will be enough to silence the Erdogan government. He also absolved Saudi Arabia for civilian casualties and humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen by pinning the blame there on Iran, and the fact that the world is a very dangerous place. And I mentioned that already. The article continues. A quote from Trump, the U.S. intends to remain a steadfast partner of Saudi Arabia to ensure the interests of our country, Israel, and all other partners in the region. Now, as stinky as these statements are, they do honestly reflect American policy. And this isn't new policy. This is the policy that's been in place for successive presidencies, going back as far as the Reagan administration in the 1980s. And Trump also smeared Khashoggi, and as you know, I am not a defender of Khashoggi. He was an insider with the Saudi royals before he kind of shifted and became a partial critic of the MBS administration. But it's not fair when Trump calls him an enemy of the state of Saudi Arabia, and the Times points out that no Saudi official has actually made that statement. So Trump makes stuff up and attributes it to people who never mentioned that. The other issue that has surfaced here is that Trump made two references to America first, one in that first kind of ejaculation at the beginning of his statement and another one at the end. And Rand Paul, a sometime critic of the president, senator from Kentucky, tweeted, "I'm pretty sure this statement is Saudi Arabia first, not America first." And on that, Mr. Paul and I agree. And to cap off this article, the Times goes to Wael Ghonim, the internet activist who rose to prominence during the Arab Spring. And he said, yeah, the world is a dangerous place when it's led by demagogic leaders who manipulate truth. And this is a power quote. Listen carefully. They lie. They know they are lying. And they know that we know they are lying. And that, I believe, is the truth. And finally in the list of outrage, the Washington Post, which claims some paternity of Khashoggi because he was contributing occasional columns there. The headline of outrage reads, "Trump broke his word on Jamal Khashoggi, plain and simple." Well, Trump lies routinely. He breaks his word on everything. How about that middle-class tax cut that he promised in the days before the election? That's just one example. And so the outrage at the Post is that he went back on his word, and they recap October 11th, this is a terrible, terrible precedent. We can't let it happen. We're being very tough. October 14th, asked about whether MBS knew about it or ordered the killing. It's being looked at very, very strongly. We would be very upset and angry if that were the case. October 18, we're waiting for some investigations. I think we'll be making a statement, a very strong statement. It'll have to be very severe. Now, as you look at these, all Trump threatened was to make a statement. And he did. And embedded in the statement is that, this was an ugly incident and the U.S. doesn't condone it. But Trump, of course, is a big picture guy. And he wants us to look at the big picture as he sees it. And that is a perspective that I don't believe I can access myself. Oh, and one more. The nation of Turkey referred to Trump's statement as comic. They trotted out Numan Kurtulmus, deputy chairman of the leading party there, the AK party. Quote, "Yesterday's statement is a comic statement. It is not possible for an intelligence agency like the CIA, which even knows the color of the fur on the cat walking around the Saudi consulate's garden, to not know who gave this order. This is not credible either for U.S. public opinion or the world public opinion." And Trump tried to change the subject this morning on Twitter, where he made no mention of Khashoggi, but he said, "Thank you to Saudi Arabia. Oil prices getting lower. Great. Like a big tax cut for America and the world. Enjoy. $54 was just $82. Thank you to Saudi Arabia. But let's go lower." Now, let's look at the unvarnished truth. I have linked to Glenn Greenwald's analysis of these expressions of outrage, selective as they are. And Greenwald gets it right. He blows the roof off the hypocrisy of politicians and media outlets, including the New York Times, who summon this tremendous outrage at this moment at Trump. And before I get into Greenwald's comments, I just want to point out, ask yourself, what would Obama have done in this situation? More likely, he would not have been as blunt and candid as Trump. But he would arrive at the same policy destination. That the Saudis are too big to discipline. They are too big to cut off. And they are too critical to our jaundiced relationship with Israel and its desires for a war with Iran. The Saudis are central to that. And that is what really drives this. So Greenwald says that Trump's statement instantly, predictably produced pompous denunciations pretending that Trump's posture was a deviation from, a grievous violation of, long-standing U.S. values and foreign policy, rather than what it actually and obviously is. A perfect example, perhaps stated a little more bluntly and candidly than usual, of how the U.S. has conducted itself in the world since at least the end of World War II. The fairy tale about U.S. standing up for freedom and human rights in the world is one of the most pervasive and powerful prongs of Western propaganda, the one relied upon by U.S. political and media elites to convince not just the U.S. population, but also themselves, of their own righteousness, even as they spend decades lavishing the world's worst tyrants and despots with weapons, money, intelligence, and diplomatic protection to carry out atrocities of historic proportions. If you worked in high-level foreign policy positions in Washington, or at the think tanks and academic institutions, or the corporate media outlets that venerate those who rise to the top of those precincts, how do you justify to yourself that you're still a good person, even though you arm, prop up, empower, and enable the world's worst monsters, genocides, and tyrannies? That's the lie you have to tell yourself so you can look in the mirror without instantly feeling revulsion. Greenwald is not holding back, can you tell? That's why it's necessary, he continues, to react to Trump's Saudi statement with contrived anger and shock, rather than admitting the truth, that he was just candidly acknowledging the core tenets of U.S. foreign policy for decades. The people who lied to the public and to themselves by pretending that Trump did something aberrational, rather than completely normal, were engaged in an act of self-preservation as much as propagandistic deceit, though both motives were heavily at play. On the New York Times editorial page, they topped the charts with pretentious, scripted moral outrage. Quote, President Trump confirmed the harshest caricatures drawn by America's most cynical critics Tuesday when he portrayed its central objectives in the world as panting after money and narrow self-interest. Yeah. And Greenwald quotes further from the editorial. Oh, no, he doesn't. This is his statement. To believe or pretend to believe that it is Trump who pioneered the view that the U.S. is willing and eager to sanction murder and savagery by the regimes with which it is most closely aligned, as long as such barbarism serves U.S. interests, signifies a historical ignorance and or a willingness to lie to one's own readers so profound that no human language is capable of expressing the depths of those delusions. Has the New York Times editorial page ever heard of Henry Kissinger? And Greenwald's not done. Another quote, as for the Saudis themselves, they have long been committing atrocities on par with and far worse than the Khashoggi killing, both within their borders and outside, and their partnership with U.S. presidents has only flourished. As the Saudis beheaded dissidents and created the planet's worst humanitarian crisis by slaughtering Yemeni civilians without mercy or restraint, Obama not only authorized the sale of a record amount of weapons to Saudi tyrants, but also cut short his visit to India, the world's largest democracy, where he was delivering lectures about the paramount importance of human rights, so he could go to pay homage to King Salman, who had just died. And he goes on to recap Hillary Clinton and her gushing statements about the brutal Egyptian dictator, Hosni Mubarak. And he quotes her, I really consider President and Mrs. Mubarak to be friends of my family, so I hope to see him often here in Egypt and in the United States. They also talk about the Obama administration's tilt toward Bahrain. Oh, and before I get there, while we're talking about Egypt, John Kerry, who succeeded Hillary Clinton, defended Mubarak's successor, General el-Sisi, by denying that he had implemented a coup when he overthrew Egypt's elected president in 2013, and there was not a peep from Barack Obama about that. And John Kerry said that the coup was an attempt to restore democracy. Then when we get to Bahrain, Greenwald points out that the Crown Prince came to visit Washington, got a meeting with Hillary Clinton. He doesn't mention that he dropped $1 million on the Clinton Foundation in order to secure that meeting, but he came away with goodies. New weapons shipments from the U.S. to Bahrain, despite their brutal crackdown on protests during that Arab Spring. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Sandra Fish, Faith Peoples, Jeffrey Stewart, and the incredible Joe Carson in Knoxville, Tennessee. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I thank you at this moment where we do express gratitude here in the U.S. culture. And I invite others to earn some gratitude. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Click menu, click Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. It's real easy to choose. $5, $10, $20 a month. The $50 annual subscription earns you the bonus gift, John Dist's new rock and roll CD, American University. As always, you can communicate with me by the U.S. mail. And if you're allergic to PayPal, you can send checks, money orders, or cash for your subscriptions. My address, Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Well, we've known because of the way Trump publicly attacked his own appointed Attorney General, Jefferson Beauregard Jim Crow Sessions the third or fourth, I can't remember now, that Trump has a really unusual view of the role of the U.S. Attorney General. He sees that job as somebody who is there to use every available means, including illegal ones, to protect the president, even if he is engaged in criminal activities. And so we're learning now something that Trump has publicly called for, but we didn't know the details until two anonymous sources talked to the Washington Post. And one of them, I suspect, is the former White House counsel, Don McGahn, who, of course, says that he would never describe his confidential work for the president. But whoever told them, the Times is reporting that White House counsel was told by the president last spring that Trump wanted to order the Justice Department to prosecute Hillary Clinton and former FBI Director Comey. McGahn rebuffed the president, saying that he had no authority to order a prosecution. While he could request an investigation, that too could prompt accusations of abuse in power. So McGahn had White House lawyers write a memo to Trump warning that if he asked law enforcement to investigate his rivals, he could face a range of consequences, including possible impeachment. And of course, this appears to be designed to make Don McGahn out to be a hero. He's the one who kept the president from going off the rails and ordering these political persecutions, witch hunts from the Justice Department. But Don McGahn was the guy who coached Brett Kavanaugh into his outraged afternoon statement that dismissed Christine Blasey Ford's accusations and put him on the frickin' Supreme Court for life. So Don McGahn, try as you might, you're not going to change my opinion of your role in this administration. Now, Trump's call to prosecute Hillary Clinton, as you have heard me say before, is not completely off base. I just referenced the deal with Bahrain. The details are that Huma Abedin was working for the State Department, drawing a paycheck, also working for the Clinton Foundation, drawing a paycheck. And when the Crown Prince donated $1 million to the Clinton Foundation, that became known very quickly at the Secretary of State's office, where she made room on her schedule to take a visit from the Crown Prince and then showered him with benefits, despite the atrocities that the royal family of Bahrain had committed during their crackdown on protests. So that's just one of many examples of where I think Bill and Hillary Clinton are liable for investigation of potential criminal wrongdoing. But I don't trust Trump. I don't trust his new acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, and so I don't support one-sided political investigations. Likewise, I think Comey operated in a very scurrilous manner related to the Clinton investigation. And I would not be opposed to an honorable, balanced investigation by a congressional committee or some outside entity. But that's never going to happen. And so I cannot support an unfair investigation and or prosecution of Clinton or Comey. The Times reports that Trump's lawyers also privately asked the Justice Department last year to investigate Comey for mishandling sensitive government information and his role in the Clinton email investigation. I do think that deserves scrutiny, but not by political loyalists who are driven to a predetermined outcome that's been determined by the guy in the Oval Office who says he's, really smart. This won't surprise you. Those 5,900 active duty troops that were sent to the southern border, well, one of the rationales was that they were there to protect the Homeland Security border guards from attacks by migrants. Now, there haven't been that many attacks by migrants over the years. They are isolated instances. And in some state of alarm, Homeland Security shut down one of the border crossings near San Diego this week, fearing that there would be a rush of the caravan migrants coming in from Tijuana. But in a memo that surfaced, the Defense Department has concluded that there is very little threat, minimal threat, that border guards would face violence that requires U.S. troops. And, of course, the law doesn't allow troops to use their weapons or conduct police activities, and they're only allowed to fire in self-defense. We're learning that the cost of this political photo op deployment has reached $72 million so far. I think it'll top out, one estimate says, at about $200 million. And we know that this was just a political stunt by our con-man president, wasting money, making miserable the lives of almost 6,000 American soldiers. They won't be home for Thanksgiving, but we're told they will be home well before Christmas, as this staged event will wrap up. A federal judge found his voice in Mississippi. Carlton Reeves, based in Jackson, overturned the provocative Mississippi attempt to ban abortions after 15 weeks. It would be one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. But the judge found that the law unequivocally infringes on the due process rights of women. He called it a deliberate attempt by the state to ask the newly conservative majority Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, and he said that the professed interest by the Mississippi legislature in women's health is pure gaslighting. The state chose to pass a law it knew was unconstitutional to endorse a decades-long campaign fueled by national interest groups to ask the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. With the recent changes in the membership of the court, it may be that the state believes divine providence covered the Capitol when it passed this legislation. Time will tell. And the judge had one other comment. The fact that men, myself included, are determining how women may choose to manage their reproductive health is a sad irony not lost on the court. And one thing I don't find in the article, usually a news account will tell you who appointed that federal judge to the bench. And there is no mention of who it was, but my guess is that Carlton Reeves was appointed by either Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. And to that point, there was another attack by Trump on Twitter against the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals based here in San Francisco. He calls it a disgrace because they ruled against him on his illegal plan to deny asylum, even an asylum hearing, to a migrant who enters the country but not at an established border crossing. We know it's flatly illegal. It contradicts the law. And after the attack on the Ninth Circuit, Chief Justice John Roberts put out a message. He said, the U.S. doesn't have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. He said an independent judiciary is something we should all be thankful for. Now, I accept the pushback from the Chief Justice against the idiocy of the president, but there are partisan judges. Now, just as I say that, I'll point out that one of the recent decisions regarding Jim Acosta and CNN and the press pass that was pulled was blistering in its denunciation of the Trump administration, and the judge had been appointed by the Donald. So it's not always predictable. Matthew Whitaker, that acting attorney general, we're getting more dirt on this guy. He earned more than $1.2 million in the past 3 years, funded by a group active in conservative politics that does not reveal its donors. That is a dark money operation. The group is called Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, also known as FACT, and it's what employed Whitaker, who also reported $103,000 in income from a law firm in which he was a partner. But that's where he made his living for the past few years, and this group that paid his salary, he was the only one on the payroll, gave him the cover to go on CNN, where he was paid an additional $15,000 for his predictably loyal Trumpist commentary. Finally today, just in time for your Black Friday shopping online, Amazon reports a major problem that customer names and email addresses were disclosed on its website. Now, I have an article here from the British-based Guardian describing it as a major data breach. But Amazon said the issue was not a breach of its website or any of its systems, but a technical issue that inadvertently posted customer names and email addresses to its website. Don't worry. At least that's what Amazon tells us. Thanks a lot for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share this far and wide. I'll be with you next Monday with a podcast here at peterbcollins.com.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling